Afternoon, everybody. Hello there. Welcome. My name is Corey Fabian Bornstein. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator here at the Nantucket Historical Association, and I'm very excited to welcome you all here this afternoon for a very special food for thought with our Verney Fellow, Ben Shattuck. While I'm kind of telling you more about this lovely talk, this would be a great opportunity to silence your cell phone so it doesn't disrupt the presentation. I also wanted to take a moment to thank you all for supporting this wonderful community program week in, week out. It's made possible in part by the W.S. Worthington Foundation and also receives media sponsorship from Novation Media, which is very nice. While you're silencing your cell phones, also wanted to remind everybody that Ben Shattuck will be joining us for a writing workshop at Greater Light this Saturday from 10 to noon with some even more practical tips for creative writing and just finding time to write every day. So if you're interested, it's $25 a person. You can register online. You can come talk to me. You can call us, do whatever you want to do. There's more information up here. On that note, Ben Shattuck is our 2014 recipient of the Jeffrey and Elizabeth Thayer Verney Fellowship. It's awarded annually to amazing people who do the most impressive research on Nantucket and Nantucket history. Ben himself is a graduate and former teaching and writing fellow from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he has taught fiction writing courses at the University of Wellington in New Zealand, or University of Victoria in Wellington in New Zealand, the University of Iowa, and Cuttyhuck Island. He's written for Salon.com, the Paris Review Daily, McSweeney's, the Morning News, and many others. He also exhibits paintings and is working on his first novel, which makes him our very first Verney Fellow to be working on a creative writing project instead of nonfiction. He's also a Morris dancer, a banjo player, and an avid birdwatcher, making him our second avid birdwatcher to talk here at the NHA this year who isn't talking about birdwatching. So on that note, please join me in giving a very warm Nantucket welcome to Ben Shattuck.
No, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to be here. It's just been magical to be in Nantucket all of October. Thank you to the Nantucket Whaling Museum for hosting me, NHA, and the Research Library. A special thanks to Betsy Tyler, whose insights have been invaluable. An extra huge thank you to Jeffrey and Elizabeth Verney for this fellowship. It's been incredible to live up on 99 Main Street. It really has been unbelievable. Since I'm the first Verney Fellow I believe, to be awarded the fellowship for fiction writing and not nonfiction, I thought I'd start the talk about the difference between fiction and nonfiction and how we approach history with those different genres in mind. What I'm really doing here, and then go into reading a little bit of the excerpt from my novel. So, which is set in 1790s Nantucket. So, here's a slide from a walk I took on the beach the other day. Imagine this. It's 1799, winter. Your name is Hepzibah House. From Nantucket Island, you're a single woman. You stand in front of the Justice of the Peace, Abner Coffin. You tell him you're pregnant, but the father of your child refuses to marry you. The justice writes in his court records, the child, if born alive, is the bastard of John Westgate, rope maker, New Bedford. You're told to detail for the justice just where you conceived the baby. It was last April, you say, in the house of John's friend, William Tuckerman. Then enters John. He stands next to you, your boyfriend, who'd rather pay $350 in child support than marry you. How do you look at each other in the courtroom? Do you smile at him? Do you still want him to marry you, even though he's willing to humiliate you like this in front of your father and the justice and abandon your child? Or say you're Rebecca Burgess in 1770. You've gone to the Justice of the Peace to say that your husband, James, is hitting you, and you're afraid for your life. James goes to jail. What are you going to do when he gets out? Or say you're Thomas McLaughlin from the early 1800s, and your father gives you to Elijah Clark as an indentured servant. You'll work until you're 21, at which point you'll get, among some farm animals, a suit of clothes. Do Do you hate your father? Do you ever ask yourself if the deal was worth it? What do you think about at night as you try to fall asleep? These are the few stories that I've found in the past few weeks. I set my writing in the past and not 2014 because of certain dramatic frameworks that I find narratively compelling, stripped of modern-day plot spoilers like cell phones and computers. Today, a stranger is a stranger for about as long as you don't Google him. I love the distinctive features of a former time and place, how information is disseminated, how privacy functions, and how social norms pressurize situations all change when you go back 50, 100, 300 years. For instance, if you read anything about colonial America, you'll read about many, many shotgun weddings, like what almost happened to Hepzibah House. Oops. Time didn't always move so quickly for us humans, but a lot has changed in America in the past 220 years, as opposed to other periods in history. This is a favorite comic. I come from 100 years in the future to warn you that nothing really changes in the next 100 years. I'll go back to this. Pulpus. At the same time, personal struggles, jealousy, hatred, self-loathing, fear of failure, marital stress are stitched into the same tapestry that spans all of humankind. It can be disarming to feel that similarity. I don't know if you've seen this project. These are photographs that have been colored recently. So there we have Mr. Whitman, Charlie Chaplin, age 27, Mr. Darwin. But the magic of historical fiction, or as I call my project, historically minded fiction, is that by setting these struggles against the backdrop of another time and place, they can often, surprisingly, seem even more familiar, laid to their barest, most elemental universal selves and gestures. In historical fiction, there are two goals. The first is a process of resurrection, re-examining what's lost or degraded over time, digging into the past, lifting from it something, some relationship, some house, some person that was once loved and new. The sweet spot of this sort of research is at diary entries and correspondences. That's where you find all the Jerry Springer stuff. Not so much for the facts of people's lives, how much butter they churned, how much wood got them through the winter, or, say in this slide, you can see from the 1790 journal, he records how many people there were on Nantucket, how many families, and actually records the numbers of each race. Or this one, which is sort of an impressive slide. You can see grandchildren 13, grandchildren 113, great-grandchildren 85. But the reasons they recorded the parts of the lives that they did. For me, looking through diaries is about harvesting perspectives, figuring out why people cared about what they cared about. Here's one of those, I feel. You can see, just recorded, year 1606, died 68,000 people of the plague in London. Or this little entry, went to Nova Scotia, 1762. And that's all we hear. In my own writing, I try to stay true to those perspectives. If I write about what I find interesting in 1790s, then I quickly exoticize the past, making a colonial theme park of tankards and whale oil lanterns instead of good fiction. I think about it like this. If someone in 220 years read our newspapers this morning, they should know that Americans might be scared of this virus called Ebola, but their fear, more importantly, characterizes a culture where we expect everything to be manageable, controlled, diagnosed, and treated by our teams of scientists, that we aren't disease crazy, but we're control crazy. So why did I choose the people of 1790s Nantucket? They're just a decade out of the Revolutionary War. The fabric of their community is stretched thin, financially and emotionally. The remains of the war are present, but almost extinguished, like cinders smoking through every relationship. I needed men with undiagnosed PTSD, the question of violence to be hanging in the air, and a few hard winters to knock folks down a few more notches. I needed isolation, deep bedrock isolation. I needed a sandy, windy, cold, watery landscape that pressed itself into every person's day. So what did people in 1790s Nantucket care about? the weather, relationships, marriages, babies, death, and God. The last fact might be the hardest to successfully capture, to write from the point of view of a character who unquestionably believes in a greater divine force coursing through his life, who believes that heaven and hell are real, that he's being watched, judged, and rewarded or punished. All of this would affect how he behaves. It's a wholly different conception and shape of accountability, that sin and God are as real as a cup he's touching, the water he's drinking, the people he hurts, and the people he loves. It's hard to find journals from the late 1700s that aren't accounts of weather or prices of corn, but sometimes you hit gold. Like this one. Look at those last 4 words: domestic, celibacy, matrimony, connubial. Or another fact about what they might reveal. Here's a pressed flower from right around 1800 in an old book. Some of the most useful journals are written in the early and mid-1800s, where there were more diarists recalling the recent past or transcribing stories of their elders. The other day I read a 19th century account of a woman recording her great-aunt's recollections of when she was a little girl, taking us to the mid-1700s. In it, the great-aunt recalls her cousin finding out that her husband had a second wife and kids of their own just across the harbor, or just across the bay, sorry. When the husband came to beg forgiveness, she wouldn't see him, so he left a pair of baby shoes on the front step and then vanished forever. The second goal of historical fiction is opposite of the first, to shed all those time-specific restrictions and relationships that structure scene and drama, and just write about character. People as we know, and write about people as we know them in our own families. Make the reader intimate with your character, with a base knowledge of how people communicated, how privacy operated, and what a house looked like, and what was expected of somebody from time to time. You can almost always assume right, given that you are human living in this world in which other humans mess up, try to be good, regret, love, have kids, and then die. The rest is verifying, fact-checking. I would honestly say that 80% of what I'm doing here at the research library is fact-checking, sharpening the world. 20% would include things like the baby shoes left by the polygamist, or what I've read about freeze-ups, or details of, say, the 1795 bank robbery. Those are facts beyond the periphery of my imagination that I lasso from the archives and tie into the book as simple, beautiful facts that they are. For instance, just a little aside on the bank robbery, one of the most intriguing parts of the 1795 bank robbery, and you all should read it, it's unbelievable. It's just not written about enough. For me, isn't about the island's witch hunt, or that it exposed the breakdown of the island's social network, or the crooks made their keys out of pewter spoons, or buried and dug up their treasure 5 times along the Connecticut or New York coast, or even the tantalizing image of bags and bags of $20,000 of gold coins that they stole from the Nantucket bank. But that for 3 days after the robbers escaped the Nantucket jail, they hid out in the moors and swamps. What happened in those 3 days? Who did they meet? Not a piece of paper, no letter, no diary entry will ever touch on that, I'm sure, and that's where fiction comes in. In nonfiction, you use the enormous fulcrum of facts to leverage a reader's emotions. The sheer number of those killed at Gettysburg, the average age of a Civil War soldier, how long it took the town of Gettysburg to bury the dead. The facts that knock your breath away. You enliven the past through whatever documentation there might be and fill the gaps through qualified guesswork. One of the most haunting passages of Sebastian Junger's The Perfect Storm, in my mind, is when Junger scientifically describes a way someone can drown, how water fills his lungs, to illuminate the horror of the last moments of a fisherman's lives. Or, in our own In the Heart of the Sea, when Nathaniel Philbrick uses more recent scientific documentation of dehydration to illuminate the hellish days the Essex crew drifted out at sea. Unlike fiction, the narrator in every nonfiction work is the author, with endless facts and research at his or her disposal. In fiction, the narrator is often part of the plot itself, and the limits or the extent of a narrator's knowledge becomes part of the story. In fiction, we use narrative, character, and scene to build abstract emotions in a reader's mind. Characters affect one another's lives, and we empathize with the fallout. Fiction writers build an argument for a person's life, make the reader care about a person they're following. In literary fiction, as opposed to young adult mystery or crime, plot becomes nothing more than character. You follow the character through a string of scenes because that character's troubles are, for a couple hundred pages, your troubles. That said, plot's more exciting points, murder, adultery, robbery, are of course things that happen every day in people's lives. I think. We tell stories to understand. How did we get to this point? We usually understand history better by knowing a character's personal story than simply by reviewing the facts. Here are two sides of information I came across the other day. In Nantucket, in 1831, the temperature dipped far below freezing for a few days on end. Here's another way to put it. In Nantucket, in 1831, two elderly widows living together as if pooling their sorrows under one roof, froze in the middle of the night in one bed, sleeping together for warmth. We tell stories. When we tell stories, we care about people. And when we care about the people, we learn what was important to them and why. We learn, in effect, their histories. The final part of this, maybe before we open to questions, I asked Corey if I could do this, is the other side of my creative and historical history obsessed life is painting. Last year I did a sort of historical documentation project on Iowa's Underground Railroad, and I thought I'd quickly go through that to show that. So these are some of my paintings. This is in the cellar of the last house where John Brown stayed before he went to Harper's Ferry. These are Black Angus cattle standing over a underground railroad, underground tunnel going from one house to another. These are the landscapes in Iowa. This is, wow, a really contrasted image. A shelf in one of the only Underground Railroad museums in all of Iowa. Iowa's done a horrible job of preserving its, well, a questionable job of preserving its Underground Railroad. These are geese flying over one of the last river crossings before the Mississippi River. Dead grass near a barn where slaves hid out all the time. This is a lantern in also one of the last museums in Iowa dedicated to the Underground Railroad, and a light bulb in a hidden passage where tourists can go and feel like a slave, which is a really uncomfortable curatorial decision. This is a barn that a historian in Iowa and I rediscovered that was written about in journals and journals and journals, an Underground Railroad barn, and it was totally dilapidated and falling down, and we found it deep in the woods on the way to that barn. And I think that's it. I'll stop there. All right, thank you very much. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, just raise a hand and I'll run over with the microphone.
I can probably hear you. When you start the research, do you begin with any kind of sense of where you think you want to go, or do you let the research itself just lead you? Do you pick up the diaries and the journal entries and say, I have no idea what's here, and I'm going to put together a lot of pieces and maybe something will happen?
Yeah, I would have to be open to those discoveries. There's no way, it's even fiction writing, the process of writing, so much of what ends up on the page is made while you're going through the process. And so same thing with research, I would say. As I started this project, like I said, I knew I wanted to set it on Nantucket, and I knew I wanted sort of the cinders of the Revolutionary War to be there. So I had an idea, a time, and a place. All these other relationships, the specifics, for instance, I was amazed at how many times I saw women coming to, like I say, what I started off with, women coming to the Justice of the Peace saying, this guy impregnated me, and the man making a decision whether he's going to pay in 1790 $350 or marry this woman. And that's a dramatic element that, yep, that's going in the novel. Like, you know, so there are elements that are just too good to resist. But the framework of, you know, what I wanted a lot of people, I wanted a very stressful situation in an isolated house in which people are stepping on each other's toes. That was something that I knew right from the beginning. And the shape of this novel was very clear to me too, that I wouldn't have many perspectives. I wouldn't move back and forward in time. You know, a lot of historical fiction, there's a platform from the present day in which I slip into the past. I just didn't, you know, I wanted it to be a plain, simple first-person confession, more or less. Yeah, yeah.
Bringing in a Jewish girl from Newport, you know, it's something I've never read in a historical novel in this time period. Did you have some characters in mind that you wanted to make sure were part of this novel, or did they develop as a result of your research?
There are a lot of people in my life who have just taken and put in 1790, more or less, and then tried to, and I'd be happy to talk about too, a lot of people ask about language and why I'm not using old-timey language. But so strip people of most modern vernacular. Yeah, and then the characters, I mean, with any short story I've written, with any longer story I've written, they really do develop as I take a character, I have an idea, and then you put them in a room with another character, and how are people in general, and how are they characterized? You have them interact, and all of a sudden, their motives, their doubts, their likes and dislikes, all become apparent as you put them in action with other people. I guess a simpler way to put that is, yes, I had some real specific people in mind, and there's just no way to justifiably try to say, I'm going to write about a 17-year-old Jewish girl in Newport in 1790 and be able to portray her character exactly as it was.
I would say that the Jews of Newport were Sephardim, so if Rivka says something unintelligible, it's more likely in Ladino than it would be in Hebrew.
Right, yeah, you know, there's one of those facts I'm going, right, you know, as I read that, I went to the Touro synagogue right before I came here and was reading a lot about the Sephardic Jews. So, right, that's one of those facts that I have to look at again.
I just wondered how much you'd written before you came here and how much you wrote while you were here.
Oh, it swells and shrinks and swells and shrinks. You know, before I came here, I'd say I had, I mean, in like a page count, probably 200 pages, and then it's gone down to around 100, and then I've actually written probably, a lot of my time here has been actually in the library researching. So I've probably written about 25, 30 pages here. Yeah.
I'm curious, as an former elementary school teacher, did you enjoy writing when you were very young?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I wrote a lot of poetry when I was younger.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much for that reading and
Yeah.
the wonderful talk. Is this on?
It's on.
I was really curious, kind of maybe ancillary matter, but we were talking about strangerhood in the modern day, being able to Google people, and also the obviously not being able to do that before 1995 or whenever it is. And it seems to me that as you take the historical craft, the idea of strangerhood is inherent in the reader's experience because they're approaching something to which they are a stranger if it's out of their lifetime. And so I guess I'm kind of freewheeling here, but as an author, how do you try to negotiate alienation but also welcoming a reader into your text, if that makes sense. And partly you said you have a modern vernacular, which might have something to do with that. But kind of how much do you use the past to make them a stranger, and how much do you try to welcome them in and make the past feel like home, I guess, or relatable? Thanks.
Yeah, I think I try to make it as relatable as possible. I mean, an ideal would be that people see their brothers or aunts or sisters or whoever it is in the characters that I render on the page. There's just no, and in terms of word choice, language, I just, you know, accuracy how and accuracy why. You know, why, if the point of your writing, if the point of fiction is to make something deeply relatable, you want to sort of bring the reader in. You want to be as kind to the reader as you can. There's no, I just do not see a reason to push the reader away. So yeah, I try to make everything as familiar as possible. But why like I say, why I really enjoy going back into historical fiction, or even a distant time, a distant place rather than distant time, is that it just it bears a lot of really interesting dilemmas and situations. And there's, yeah, like I say, none of those spoilers, which you can't write a story today and not include cell phones, you know, or cars, or the way people communicate and travel and privacy operates is just inherently different. And it would be untrue to write a story today that doesn't include all those parts.
I think we have time for one more.
One more. Just watched the Rick Burns film about Nantucket.
Mm.
And I had a sense that a lot of the families who lived here realized they were sitting on a historical trove, and they wanted to consolidate it. And I think that's the library you were talking about doing the research in. The historical library here.
Yep, yep.
How extensive are the diaries, the journals, the records, that kind of stuff?
Very, yeah. I actually haven't been down to the wellspring that is, you know, that I request something and it comes back to me, and it's like just an endless tide. There's just no shortage. I'd love to see it, what it actually looks like, but it just seems like this place has been, yeah, collecting documents for a long time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for answering some questions, and thank you all for coming.